Hello everyone and welcome back to session 11 of the Protestant Reformation. Wow, series is almost done and the summer is almost done and I do not know how we got here, but we are here. I'm Danielle Kuhn. I'm the Director of Faith Formation at St. John the Baptist. I do RCIA, RE, and youth group. I'm not a historian. I don't have a PhD in this time period in history and am by no means a professional. So before we start, I want to give my usual disclaimer that this is just a subject I love to talk about and read about and learn about. And I'm still constantly learning and wanting to learn. So I'm by no means uber qualified, maybe mildly qualified, I would say that. Okay, so today we do the second on our 3 sessions that we're talking about the Catholic response to the Reformation. So we had the Council of Trent. That's kind of what we left off with. For anyone who missed last week, Council of Trent was the council that took a long time to get moving and happening, but finally was convened in 1545 for the first time, I think, mid-1540s by Pope Paul III. It took a while because of politics, and you really needed a lot of the church higher-ups to call the council, but the council was being called to address the corruption of the church higher-ups. Thus, the church higher-ups, some of them, weren't super enthusiastic about calling a council to address their own corruption. At the Council of Trent, it occurred over 3 different sessions, and it was really meant to focus on 3 issues. One, the so-called Protestant problem. So the issue of, all these Protestant reformers broke away from the Catholic Church. Can we bring them back into the Catholic Church? This had no chance of being solved. By the time that the Council of Trent was called, no chance. Numbers 2 and 3 for their goals were addressing clerical corruption and reforming the clergy, and then also reforming the liturgy and clarifying doctrine, Catholic doctrine. Kind of doubling down, we'll see. So yeah, that's what we talked about last week, and we talked about some of the reforms that they had for the clergy, like actually instituting seminaries and having regulations such that you had to have councils of priests, and the archbishop had to actively oversee his diocese, and priests actually had to work at the parishes they were assigned to, and bishops actually had to work at the diocese they were assigned to, and having much more strict enforcement of the rules for when you could become a bishop. You know, no more 12-year-old, 19-year-old, 23-year-old bishops. And then also similarly for cardinals. So all of that was really, really great. What we're going to talk about today is more the liturgical reforms, as well as some other cultural things that came around from the Council of Trent. Yeah, but really focusing on the liturgy, because that was really big and one of the huge successes of the Council of Trent, I think. It had all of the Council of Trent had a top-down approach. So one of the benefits and strengths of the Catholic Church is it does have a really strong central authority, and that central authority has a really great power to lead people in either a positive or a negative direction. In the past, because of that central authority, it had hurt the church because a lot of those with authority were abusing that. Not everyone by any means. But it only takes, a handful of people really abusing their power to make people unhappy with the central authority. So during the Council of Trent, the church had this wonderful opportunity to use their authority and that strength that they had in this central structure that had so much ability to guide people, and they really took the church in a positive direction. So it was a very head-down approach. But because it was head-down, the reforms that occurred at the head, so the hierarchy of the church within the Roman Curia and working with the popes and cardinals, those reforms took a while to always be fully enacted by the lay people and, the priests who were operating in dioceses way far away in Latvia. And so full enactment of all the Tridentine reforms. Tridentine refers to Council of Trent. So if it is a thing of the Council of Trent, we call it Tridentine. I'm going to say Tridentine. But eventually, by mid-1600s, everyone had adopted them. Prior to the Council of Trent, the Roman Catholic Church, the Catholic Church in general, was this kind of paradoxical mix of local and universal. So the word Catholic means universal. So even with the name of the Catholic Church, you have the attribute of being universal. But though the church called itself Catholic for all people, it relied on very local foundations. So customs, saints, feasts, prayers, liturgy, different rituals, they could vary a ton according to location. If you went to Mass in one Italian town and then traveled 10 miles away to another Italian town, Mass could look quite different. And as the Protestant Reformation moved forward and you saw all this fragmentation and increasing divisiveness among the Protestants, there was a movement within Catholicism to push against this sort of cultural fragmentation and really build on unity and kind of bring everyone together. We are Catholic, we are universal. Let's show that in our liturgy. So there was this movement of wanting to be more united. And we see that in a lot of the reforms of the Council of Trent. They take these steps to move towards uniformity and globalization. The Protestant Reformation, it created kind of a desire to draw a distinction between us and them on both sides, to really want to create some demarcating lines in between. That's Protestant, this is Catholic, or this is Protestant, that's Catholic. So as the Protestant movement continued to look ever more divided, the Catholics in their response wanted to look ever more united, so that there could be indeed a deeper division, showing they're the divided ones, we're super united all together. Every challenge thrown at Catholics, whether it was by Zwingli or Calvinism or Lutherans, Anglicans, Radicals, Anabaptists, it spurred a Catholic reaction that sought to define Catholic identity even more. So there is definitely something to be said by the fact that the Protestant Reformation, in drawing its distinctions and pulling away from Catholicism, made a lot of Catholics more aware of what they believed. Because, and you see this if you have ever talked to children or sometimes, just adults about the differences between Protestants and Catholics. It can be really confusing for kids who are Catholic when they are encountering the idea of Protestantism, or just the fact that there are people who aren't Catholic, because they're like, wait, they don't believe in the Eucharist? They don't have priests? Their churches look very different. And it's like, what? Why? And in asking that why, a lot of times people, especially kids, can become more aware of what they as Catholics believe. They don't have priests? Why? Oh, well, they don't think priests are important. Well, why do we think priests are important? And then that opens a discussion into why we do think priests are important, or why the Eucharist is really important, and why we believe in transubstantiation and all these different things. So, as the Protestant Reformation occurred, for a lot of Catholics, it was this time of really realizing, I believe this, and this is what I want, and I am drawing a line in the sand, and I am not Protestant, and I want to be different. And the same thing for Protestants. We've kind of already seen a lot of Protestants wanting to be I don't want to be associated with any idolatry. I am burning all the sacred art. Yeah. And Catholics also want to protect this identity. They want to take care of it better. You see that a lot in their response too. You can take, for example, the case of religious imagery. As Protestants attacked the Catholic Church as idolatrous and superstitious and, took steps to burn sacred art and iconoclasm in the churches and the whitewashed walls, Catholics not only attempted to clean house by attacking any errors, so in wanting to protect sacred art and the beauty of different Catholic rituals, the first thing they want to do is protect it, so they want to examine it and get rid of any errors. If there was any superstition, which we've talked about in this series, it could get into different Catholic piety practices. So the Protestants attacking it, saying, oh my gosh, you're so idolatrous, superstitious, made the Catholics have this response of examining it, trying to clarify any errors and be like, no, we don't want to be superstitious, but we do want this art because we believe in its beauty and how it points us to God. So they want to get rid of any of the errors and superstitions that do plague and create a cult of images. But then they also begin to promote the veneration of images more aggressively. So it's hearing the Protestants, making sure that there is no dirt for them to dig up on you anymore, so to speak. There's no hold for their insults to hold. There's like a common colloquial phrase that's on the tip of my tongue. It's something about like their insults won't stick, something like that. So they examine all their errors, try to get rid of them all, and then double down on art and sacred imagery and beauty and ornateness. So as Protestant churches continue to get more and more stark, the whitewashed walls, very, very little decoration, if any, very, very simple. You see in Catholic churches the rise of like Baroque and Rococo styles in churches, which are really noted for their ebullience and overflowing decoration. And I have just a few examples because I think it's really interesting. I went through a long time period where I just hated Baroque. Baroque and Rococo, it's not my favorite style of church. It's not. But I like it more knowing what the movement occurred in response to. So here we have a Baroque church. Baroque art is meant to kind of stupefy or just shock you into awe with everything. It's very busy. It's got a lot going on. Compare this with this is a Rococo church on the left. Rococo came about a little bit later. A little bit kind of at the end of the Baroque period, and it's a little more flowery. Rococo comes from a Latin word meaning shell, and it's a little bit more feminine. You can look around the edges of different decorations, and the sculpting is almost floral, swirly, kind of looking like waves or the sea. That's kind of the look of a Rococo church. But both of them, you can see they're very opulent. They're like, how much art should we put in this church? And they just answered, yes, all the art, everywhere. If there's a spot to put art, put it there. Sacred imagery, all over the place. In contrast, other styles of churches, which I personally like a little bit more, my favorite is the Gothic church, so something like Notre Dame, really known for like buttresses and these kind of arcing, I'm no architect, but flying buttresses and this, I don't know what you would call that, the arcing shape that you see in the ceiling. And then there's Romanesque churches, which are similar to, oh my goodness, they're similar to Gothic churches on the inside, but on the outside they have a lot less buttresses. They're a lot more Italian, and they have a lot more roundness, cylindricalness, as you can kind of see in the exterior of this church. One more example of a Baroque church I wanted to give. you can just see it's a little bit, not harsh, but what's the word? Just, it's a little less feminine, more masculine, more robust, strong looking than the Rococo style, but it's just artwork everywhere. Compare that with the Gothic church, which is kind of more austere, some stained glass windows, but other than that, it's really not like, there's not paintings up and down every single column. Yeah, so that was a little digression into church architecture and style. We don't see really like hardly any of those styles over here in America, but if you go to Europe, it's fun to go to the different churches and be like, oh, this is Rococo, this is Romanesque, this is Gothic, this is Baroque. Yeah, like Italy, tons of Romanesque churches. Gothic, like good examples of Gothic would be the Duomo in Milan, or of course Notre Dame. You see a lot of Baroque churches in Germany. Germany, yeah, a lot in Germany, I'd say. And that kind of Austria area. They're everywhere, but there's a lot there. Okay, that was a digression. But so we have this rise of Baroque and Rococo. And not just in the churches is there kind of this extravagance of art, but in just sacred art in general. There's this movement to go back to doing depictions of biblical figures and biblical narratives in art, that sort of thing. Just a real resurgence from the Catholics there, because they're like, oh, you don't like our art? We're going to make so much of it that you can't get away from it. It's going to be everywhere in your face all the time. Again, wanting to draw that distinctive line. You're going to whitewash your churches? We're going to put art over literally every single part of our churches. It's kind of funny if you think about it. So this desire for unity, we're still working with the Council of Trent here. This desire for unity is very present during the Council of Trent, and it affected the reforms put into motion with the clergy in the liturgy. Like I said earlier, the liturgy could be all over the place. So post-Council of Trent, the Catholic Church saw sweeping changes that established regularity and order to the clergy and liturgy that really seem like norms to us now, but they're things that just came about in the mid to late 1500s. They were all new during that time period. So we'll start with reforms of the liturgy. So the Council of Trent retained Latin as the sole language for all Catholic worship, and also supplanted most local liturgies with a new universal ritual code. So Latin was going to be the language we did all the masses in. And you could do homilies in common tongue of wherever you are, but all the other parts were just going to be in Latin. That way, if a guy is from England and he travels to Milan, he can go to Mass and he knows what's up. That would be really helpful. Because it wouldn't only be that, oh, if he went to Mass in Milan, it would be in Italian mixed with Latin. It would be not the same prayers, not the same ritual. You would still have a liturgy of the word, and you would still have a pretty set liturgy of the Eucharist. The liturgy of the Eucharist was always pretty set from very early on in the church. But other things like the songs you sing, the prayers you say, do we do a Kyrie? Do we not? Is there a Gloria? Do we say a creed? All of those types of things. How you pray the Mass, where people stand, where people sit and kneel, that could look very different depending on where you go. So, guy from England going to Mass in Milan doesn't always know what he's in for. He's like, I know what the general thing will be, and once we get to the Liturgy of the Eucharist, I'm on board, like I know what's going to be going on. But there could be a lot of variation. So, these reforms that we see come out of the Council of Trent produce the Tridentine Mass, which many If you went to Mass pre-Vatican II, or you've been to like a traditional Latin Mass, or just an Ad Orientem Mass, will be familiar with. The Tridentine Mass came from the Council of Trent, and it's the result of these efforts to have universalization. Later on, we see in Vatican II, the Church again addressing the needs of her people, realizing, we have an issue here, and then changing the liturgy to address that need. It's important to note that the Church never changes the intrinsic essentials of a liturgy. So there's always a liturgy of the Word, there's always a liturgy of the Eucharist. And like I said, the liturgy of the Eucharist has looked very much the same from very early on in the Church. But you can change the externals of the liturgy to allow for more varied expression in liturgy. I talked about, it was just last week, I think, that I talked about the difference between canon law and divine law. Canon laws are not natural or moral laws. Like if the Church didn't exist, or if Adam and Eve had never sinned, there would not be canon law. There would just be natural moral law. Canon laws can be changed. You can look at fasts, rules for fasting that the Church has given out as examples for canon laws that have changed. Whereas divine laws or moral laws, natural laws, all interchanging names for the same thing, those don't ever change, and they're always applicable. There's no getting out of those. They're always there. They are written into the nature of reality itself. So everyone within the Church is still bound to canonical law, because what is bound on earth is bound in heaven. What is loosed on earth is loosed in heaven. That is the power given to the chair of Peter and to the authority of the Church. So as Catholics, we have a duty of obedience to the Church, such that disobeying canon law is also disobeying natural God's law, because natural law has a duty of obedience to those authorities for whom it is right and proper for you to give obedience. All that to say, in the Council of Trent, in Vatican II, both times those councils were addressing real needs in the people of the Church. And in changing the externals of the liturgy, they were providing for a real need. Prior to the Council of Trent, there could be mass confusion with the masses. And then by Vatican II, we've got the Tridentine Mass going on. Everything is in Latin, but Latin is not as widely known at all as it was in the 1500s. That's not to say that everyone spoke Latin, but a good number of educated people did. And even for those who didn't, it was still a much more common language than it is today. Now it's extremely uncommon. You don't hear it really except in a Catholic setting. And then not to mention a much larger percentage of Catholics were French, Italian, and Spanish, and could kind of naturally get the gist of Latin a little bit more. All that to say, Latin was a lot more unintelligible for people pre-Vatican II. And you had this issue of a lot of people just going through the motions, having no idea what their faith really was, any of it really meant, having an inability or a difficulty connecting to it, not having enough of a personal role in the Mass and really being active. That doesn't mean you can't be active during the Tridentine Mass. Definitely not. Just there was an issue that the Church recognized in her people at that time. So they open up, they make some changes to the Mass post-Vatican II, and you don't always have traditional Latin Mass. And just a word kind of on the whole Tridentine Mass, Ad Orientem thing versus Novus Ordo. I see sometimes among Catholics a division where we want to say traditional Latin Mass is the only valid form, and other forms of the Mass, other forms of the liturgy are lesser and less holy and less good. Or oppositely, people saying the traditional Latin Mass is so archaic and you can't ever connect and it's not a good form of the liturgy. Both are valid, beautiful forms of the liturgy that really speak to different strengths. And I just think it's sad sometimes when we see divisions come up within the church about something where there should not be a division. Ad orientem, traditional Latin Mass, has some really beautiful things. Having that ad orientem posture, it can really add to the prayerfulness for both the priest and the people. It can be easier sometimes to have an attitude of prayerfulness. At the same time, the Novus Ordo Mass is beautiful for that more connection between the people and the priest, and there's a little bit more accessibility. You can hear, you can know more deeply what you're saying with the prayers. And so both of the forms are beautiful and great and valid because they're just different external versions of the liturgy. And there's no need to condescend on either one because they're both good. They're both good. They just speak to different needs of the church. How wonderful and beautiful it is that we have a faith with the Mass that can have different forms of liturgy and can express its beauty in different ways. That's awesome. We can go to different types of Masses and experience Christ in both of them. Let's celebrate that instead of condescending. It's a beautiful thing. All right. With that being said, we'll move on. That was another digression. All right. So, liturgical reform. We had the reform of the breviary. There it is, breviary. This is the book of all the collections and prayers that hold the divine office, or the liturgy of the hours, which priests still pray today, every day. And they were expected to pray that every day then as well. But the breviary at the time had become super bloated because it wasn't that regulated. So people were always like throwing prayers in, like, hey, my cousin who's a priest over in Parma wrote this prayer. I think it's beautiful. Let's pop it in the breviary. Or like, this was my favorite saint. They have a really pretty prayer. Let's put that in the breviary. People were just stuffing things left and right in the breviary. And it was this huge book, super confusing. Nothing was laid out in any kind of really discernible pattern. And there were so many saints' feast days. On any given day, you just had tons of saints lined up who you could celebrate the feasts of. And sometimes you had saints in one town that didn't exist in any other towns. Or you had towns that favored their patron saint. So that saint always took precedent over any of the other saints, even if it was like a feast day for Mary, or a solemnity celebrating, something in the life of Jesus. They'd be like, oh no, St. Joe of our local town, we really love him. We're going to celebrate his feast instead. So they were looking to have a little bit more order and regularity and pattern so that when a priest, no matter where he is in the world, prays the divine hours, divine office, everyone's praying the same prayer and everyone celebrates the same feast. We want to get everyone on the same page here. So they create a commission. Did I say the name of the commission? I'm going to get to the name of the commission. The commission in charge of revising and standardizing this breviary cut down a lot of the number of saints' feast days and then also prioritize them. So we kind of have a hierarchy of what feast should be celebrated over what. So for example, if we had the Feast of the Holy Family, which always occurs the Sunday after Christmas, that's going to take precedence over whatever saint is having their feast day that day. So like the Feast of the Holy Family can change its day. It might be on the 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th. But no matter what, no matter whose saint's feast day it happened to fall on, Feast of the Holy Family takes precedence. And then other things too. Easter, Easter, the date doesn't always stay the same. If Easter lands on, a saint's feast day, that saint has to wait another year if they really want to be recognized. And I'm sure they're fine with that because they know all glory to God above. So that kind of thing. You have a hierarchy in knowing like, okay, well, yeah, the Feast of the Ascension or Feast of Pentecost is going to take precedence over St. Joe of your local town's feast. They also trimmed the prayers so that every priest can say the same prayers every day and the same readings. So a lot of prayers were cut out because there was just too many. And after the breviary came the Mass. So we'll go back to our Mass picture here. At the time, again, like I've said, it had no standard text and no standard missal. There was relative uniformity, like I've said, on basic structure, but a lot of the rituals and external features of the liturgy could vary a ton. And also, everyone was using its different calendars for readings, so there was not uniformity on the readings. Now that seems crazy to us now because, yeah, of course I can go onto the USCCB website and know exactly what readings everyone is saying today during Mass. But at the time period, it was not like that. There was no set missal for readings, so you didn't necessarily know what you were going to go get or listen to. Not really getting anything, you're listening. I mean, you get something from listening, but hopefully. And then they also have a problem with votive masses. This is something... Votive masses. It's okay to have a mass said for a special intention. We still do this, right? But at the time, they were having a little bit of an issue with certain types of votive masses. Remember what I said? They wanted to crack down on getting rid of superstition and any kind of cult-like practices. This was one of the areas they needed to address because people had started doing these types of votive masses where you had to do a certain mass at a certain time for a certain number of days in a row, and you had to have a certain number of candles on the altar. And if you did all these little things, then your petition, your prayer intention was sure to be granted. And that really borderlines on superstition because God doesn't ask us to have 6 candles as we celebrate Mass at 6 p.m., 6 days in a row. And then as long as you do that, boom, like you will be healed of whatever. There are certain circumstances, special circumstances, where God might specifically ask a person. You can think of different miracles where they say, like, come to this. I think of like Marian apparitions where they say, come visit me at this time every day. Even that, I don't know if there's ever been like a petition, like, I will cure you of blindness as long as you do this. But you don't want to have a set standard practice, like a catalog of votive masses where you're like, yes, I'd like to do the 3 candle 3 days in a row at 3 p.m., please, for this intention. That would be awesome. And there was a little bit of that kind of practice. And it definitely got superstitious, and they completely banned all those types of masses. Again, you can still have votive masses. We still have votive candles, as you can see. But there's a big difference between saying, I'm entrusting this Mass and my intention to God. I offer this Mass to God for my intention. And, your will be done, God, in my life. And saying, all right, God, I'm going to do the special candle Mass 4 days in a row. And that will make you have to grant me my intention or my petition. There's a difference in attitude. Yeah. And bishops were to completely banish from the church the practice of any fixed numbers of candles or fixed number of masses. That was gone. And, like, that was the exact type of problematic stuff that the Protestants complained about. The Roman Missal, next up after the breviary, is the Roman Missal. And if you're wondering what, I want to bring back the breviary actually. Hold on here. If you're wondering what is the difference between the breviary and the Roman Missal, the Roman Missal contains, well, if you get a Roman Missal, it contains a lot. Like, it's got spiritual meditations, prayers, consecrations, examinations of conscience. They pack a lot into one of these books. Highly recommend it. If you don't have one, it's like a little tiny, cute little treasure trove that's impossible to navigate, but like a little adventure every time you open it. So that's the Roman Missal. It has Mass readings. Mostly it's supposed to be focused on, it has Mass readings and prayers, so like the Collect, the Entrance Antiphon, Communion Antiphon, that kind of thing. Whereas the Breviary has the Divine Office, so the Liturgy of the Hours, and that's the difference. You can find books that sort of are hybrids of the two. So if you think of like the Magnificat subscription, you will get not all of the Divine Office, but some parts of the Divine Office. Like you have morning prayer and you have evening prayer, and you have the Mass readings, and you have spiritual reflections, and you have Saints of the Day. You know, if this is intimidating, subscribe to the Magnificat. It's also great. When I was a little kid and I got bored in Mass, I would just take my mom's Magnificat and read about saint biographies. I loved to read about the martyrs because they were the most intense and the ones I was most impressed by. Magnificat. So with the Roman Missal, this was issued in 1570, which replaced every other local missal and finally established a uniformity in what readings we're going to say on what day, and kind of created the liturgical calendar of readings. So that established a much greater uniformity in Mass, because you're going to have your first reading, your responsorial psalm, your second reading, your gospel, and the Roman Missal is going to tell you what to do for every day. How wonderful and beautiful. I feel like for a lot of priests, that just must have been maybe difficult to adjust to at first, but after a while, it's like, oh, yes. It's just laid out. I know what to do. It's all set for me. I've got clear directions. I know where I need to be and what I need to be doing. I would have liked that as a priest. So for the first time, a Catholic could go to Mass on any continent and in any region and celebrate the same thing as they might be celebrating a continent away. You're going to be saying the same readings, having the same Eucharistic prayers, just going through the exact same liturgy, which is great. Again, this movement towards uniformity was what was needed at the time to really be a strong response to the fragmentation of Protestantism, and to just, in general, like, mobilize Catholics. Be like, hey, let's focus on our togetherness. That's where a big strength of ours comes from, our global family. So, this is the council that was formed. The Congregation for Sacred Rites and Ceremonies was formed after the Council of Trent. Kind of formed during the Council of Trent, but put into motion after the Council of Trent concluded. And they were in charge of handling questions and matters of ritual, as well as in the canonization process. So this council standardized sacraments, the rite of exorcism, and then really standardized and made the process for becoming a saint or being declared a saint a lot more rigorous and demanding. And then similarly for miracles too. So yeah, prior to this, you could have some people who were made a saint and you like look into their life and it's like, not much is known about this saint. Legend has it they killed a giant flying serpent and God had them levitate. And it's like just that tiny bit, and how did we make them a saint if all that we know is that they killed a giant flying serpent? Before here, there was less strict regulations into looking into people. Post Council of Trent, the canonization process is a lot more rigorous. You have to have, I believe it's either 2 or 3 miracles that can't be proven by science, and you have to have scientists that look into that. You have like a number of steps. You can go from friend of Christ to venerable to blessed to finally saint. The process can take a very long time. It can also take a very short time depending on certain factors that I'll talk about later. But the council, it has in mind Lorenzo de Valla. We're going all the way back to when I talked about humanism, I think in the second session. Lorenzo de Valla was one of the guys who, after studying some ancient documents in Greek and Hebrew, realized that some documents that were circulating during the 1300s and 1400s saying that they were from the early church weren't actually from the early church, and they were forgeries. So basically, the church was like, we need to make sure we are doing an awesome job fact checking. We do not want to have an embarrassing mishap like that one with Lorenzo happen again. Therefore, from now on, in order to be declared a saint, in order for a miracle to be declared authentic, a lot needs to happen, and we are going to be really, really vigorous. And you still, of course, see this even more so, really, in the church today. For things like Marian apparitions, you will never see the church, while a Marian apparition is ongoing, say, yes, this is a valid apparition, this is, like, we approve of this. The most they'll say is, we don't condemn it. Like, we find nothing heretical in what's happening here. And that's because while apparitions or claims of apparitions are ongoing, the Vatican can't investigate them for authenticity because they're ongoing. You don't want to say, oh yeah, these apparitions are valid, and then the next time the apparition happens, you know, the apparition of Mary tells the visionaries that there's 3 new sacraments that she's bringing down. Then the church would have to backtrack and be like, whoa, 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 this is not an okay apparition. So, yeah. And even with the apparitions that have happened and have concluded and are over, there are few that the church is like, yes, we approve of this, we get behind it, and we back its authenticity. Because it takes this more cautious approach, which I think is wise. So the canonization process. Similar to how the church doubled down on sacred art, the church doubles down on saints too. And it really upholds with vigor not only saints, but sanctification as a process and belief as well. So I've talked about this a few times throughout this series, but the Protestant reformers are reacting against the idea that merit has, like, there's any merit in works, that there's any merit tied to anything that we do. A natural consequence of that pulling away from that idea is that you also pull away from saints. Because what's the basis of why we venerate saints? We believe that by their actions, they demonstrated amazing, immense love, and that by their actions, they were very holy people. Like, they became holier people through the grace of God and their cooperation with that grace in their own actions. So, I mean, why was Mother Teresa so holy? Like, where can we see evidence of her love for God and her holiness? In everything she did for the poor. Like, we believe that. We believe her holiness is evident in her works, in her actions, and that those actions had merit. Because Protestant reformers just react against this idea, they react against the saints, they react against the idea of sanctification. There is no notion of becoming holier. You cannot grow closer to God on earth. You are, again, a ball of dung covered in snow. And there's no changing that. There is no altering of your spiritual state by your own actions. And because they don't think you can alter your spiritual state by your own actions, they're against saints. And the Catholics are like, oh, you don't think they're saints? They're saints, all right. We're going to show you all the saints. And you do see a lot of people come out of this period as saints. Some of my favorite saints. I mean, Saint Francis de Sales, Saint Teresa of Avila, Charles Borromeo, Saint John of the Cross, Saint Ignatius of Loyola. You have really good saints that come out of this time period. Not only good in their, doing good works, but the writings that they have and the intellect, their minds that they contribute to the church. I mean, Saint Ignatius, we'll talk about him next session, with everything that he contributed to the spiritual life and understanding the spiritual life and progressing in a spiritual life. And similarly with John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, talking about prayer, St. Francis de Sales and apologetics and living the faith. It's just a great time period for awesome saints, and very intellectual saints. Yeah, where was I? I got on another digression. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is just more notes on how the Protestants rejected saints. Oh, Protestants did have a real concern that in embracing saints, you were directly contradicting sola fide. Because you were. Yeah, I mean, saints are pretty contradictory to sola fide because it says, like, no, you're holy through what you do as well. It's not just like you have faith and that's all. What you do has merit and makes a difference. Protestants were very concerned that having this notion of saints would give the message to people that they can achieve their own salvation. And that is a danger that we never want to fall into as Catholics. Again, as Catholics, we do not believe that we can earn our own salvation. We are not Pelagianists. We do not subscribe to the heresy of Pelagianism. We cannot, no matter how hard we try or how devoted our will, earn heaven. We are saved through Christ alone and his grace, but we cooperate with that grace. And the greater degree that we cooperate with that grace, the greater our holiness. So Mother Teresa, why was she so holy? She cooperated with so much of God's grace. She said yes to so much of God's grace in her life. And I know that makes it seem like it's so easy, like, oh, I'll be a saint if I just say yes to all of God's grace. Like, come at me, grace, then. But giving that yes to God is a lot more difficult in practice than in theory, because we're all control freaks who want to do everything ourselves and don't want to depend on anyone. Yeah. So there was a genuine spirit of renewal in Catholic people during this time. And this, coupled with the papal reforms to canonization and the emphasis on the saints and the wanting to have that distinction, it contributed to a lot of circulation of stories of saints. So you would hear about men and women way far away in Latvia, down in Italy, that were doing amazing things for the faith and living for God, and people in England who were dying for their faith, who were being martyrs for Catholicism. And this really, one, increased the movement towards uniformity and coming together, and then two, also strengthened people's love and desire to be Catholic. You're inspired by these incredible men and women that you see doing incredible things. The biggest way that canonizations made an impact during this time, so canonizations themselves, was how they focused on saints who were reformers. So this isn't to say that the church was wrong in canonizing these saints at all. It was not a mistake on the church's part. But they did have an intense focus on certain men and women for canonization. These men and women who were really doing the work of reform, think St. Francis de Sales, kind of received the fast track to sanctity. So you do still have all those, or to canonization. You still have all the steps, but, your name can be fast tracked to the top of the pile to go through all those steps, or can kind of like be left in the we'll get to him sometime pile. So people who were involved in the Catholic Reformation, responding to the Protestant reformers, they got fast tracked, which helped the Catholic response during this time, because when you're circulating, when you're canonizing people who were these great reformers inspiring renewal in the church, it gets people jazzed about that. And we see the exact same thing today. Like Pope John Paul II, Mother Teresa, I think I'm blanking on her name. I think her name was Julia or Gemma Giuliani. She's Italian. She was a mom and a doctor, and she died for her baby so that her baby could live. She's a saint. She's a very modern saint, but she got fast-tracked. One reason, I don't know this for sure, but I would say one reason why she gets fast-tracked is because her life and the holiness she had, the charism that she had, is so relevant to today's society. So in terms of inspiring people with the pro-life message, with showing someone's awesome commitment to the protection of life and love of their children and the sanctity of the life of their children, that's a beautiful witness to people now, because there is a deep need for that kind of witness now. So if you are looking to get on the fast track for canonization right now, may I recommend to you, really being, what's the word here? Intensely chasing and working towards holiness in the areas of pro-life ministries, or protecting the dignity and sanctity of marriage, in fighting for those who are marginalized in society, like immigrants or the homeless, those who are addicted, working for prison reform. All of those things are very pressing modern problems, and if you, made that your way of love and showing love and glory to God, that could get you on the fast track for canonization nowadays. Just a little tip. You're welcome. A little tip if you want to be declared a saint faster. Okay. Miracles. So along with the upsurge of saints and mystics who convened with God in a way that Protestants said you can't, there was also an increase in the frequency of reported miracles. Now, unlike today I don't think you'd ever find a Protestant who says they don't believe in miracles. But during the initial Reformation, Protestants really wanted to get away from miracles. They were downplaying them a lot. Like, maybe not flat out saying miracles are not possible, but really taking down many, many notches the frequency of miracles, or the degree to which God worked in the natural world. The mindset kind of comes about because, one, Protestants want to reject superstition. So, stop looking for miracles, stop looking for the supernatural, stop being superstitious. And they're concerned that, too great a belief in miracles will lead to superstition. But then two, Protestant reformers, they have this mindset of the material is so base and depraved and corrupt. The idea of a transcendent God working within that base material to do miracles was like, ugh, no, that's ruining my picture of God. It was distasteful. Remember, this is part of the motivating ideology for rejecting the Eucharist and other sacraments, because the sacraments are all about the spiritual and the material coming together and being this, external sign, exterior sign of an interior grace, physical sign of a spiritual grace. So because of this, Protestants rejected miracles and rejected the notion of the supernatural and the spiritual intimately working within the physical. So, of course, the Catholics are gonna be all about their miracles, and they're really the proliferation of the claims to miracles. And I say claims because I don't know, again, the church got very strict about its verification process for miracles, so there were very, very many claims. And a good number of them were authentic. We had a lot of Eucharistic miracles occurring during this time, which is especially beautiful since there was such a rejection of the Eucharist going on now. To have all these Eucharistic miracles going on during the time was a really beautiful witness for Catholics. Brought a lot of joy. And it was not a free-for-all though, because again, the church, anytime a miracle was reported, they're like, listen guys, we don't want to be accused of being superstitious, so let's be very methodical in how we look into this and whether we're going to say if it was authentic or not. And even if there's a little bit of doubt about it being authentic, we better be on the cautious side and not declare it authentic. Healings were really common as well, and especially those miracles that were written about in the lives of the holy men and women who were becoming saints during this time period. So Catholics really got behind a lot of these Eucharistic miracles too, because it was like, the distinction between Catholic and Protestant. They're like, Eucharistic miracles. See, Eucharist, real, transubstantiation. Okay, I can get through the last of this. So last thing is just lay involvement and education. The Council of Trent also gave a lot of attention to renewing and invigorating the role of the laity. So it just opened up a lot more access to having things called confraternities, which we would just think of as like mums or Knights of Columbus, stuff like that now. There was also a lot more efforts to educate. They came out with the Catechism of the Council of Trent in 1566. That was helping to clarify all those doctrines that we talked about last session. They also came out with, and I think this is so wonderful, the Summa Doctrinae Christianae in 1555, which was written especially for adolescents. And I would love to get my hands on like a translation of this in English, because I'd really like to know in 1555, what did a book look like that was written especially for adolescents? And I want to take it and compare it to my youth catechism that I have now and see. I was reading a paraphrased version of the Bible this morning in the Old Testament, reading some crazy story in Kings. And at one point in the paraphrased version, there was a king that said the phrase, "Don't count your chickens before they've hatched," in the Old Testament. And I just thought that was the most hilarious thing. So I don't know, I'd love to see if the Summa Doctrinae Christianae does any kind of paraphrasing of that kind of comical variety, because seeing an ancient Jewish king in the Old Testament say, "Don't count your chickens before they've hatched," was maybe the highlight of my morning. Paraphrased Bible, it's a lot of fun. A lot of inaccuracies. Yeah. All right, so that is liturgical reforms. Catholic reform here was guided by really the single metaphor of healing of the body of the church. Healing the head first, because that was honestly, like, that's the most important thing to heal first. If you want to help heal the laity, you've got to heal your own corruption and deal with your issues, which they did. So the whole metaphor was healing the body of Christ, first with the head and then going and healing the rest of the limbs. And next session, we'll talk about the Jesuits, St. Ignatius of Loyola, and how they got started and the role that they played in helping to heal the rest of the body of the Christ, the rest of the body of Christ, his church, in the Catholic response to the Reformation. Thank you all for joining me tonight, and I will see you next week. Last session. Wow. I hope you all have a great night.